Hey everybody, welcome to the Herd Fit Podcast with Dr. Sam Rhee and myself, Coach David Syvertsen. This podcast is aimed at helping anyone and everyone looking to enhance their healthy lifestyle through fitness, nutrition, and most importantly, mindset. Welcome back to the Herd Fit Podcast. I am Coach David Syvertsen here with my co-host, Dr. and Coach Sam Rhee, and we have a very special guest with us today. He is actually a member at CrossFit Bison, and just getting to know him a little bit more and stalking him a little bit online, I came to know that he is one of very few people in my personal life that I know that actually has a Wikipedia page. This is Dylan Casey. He was a professional cyclist for a long time. We're going to get into his career, and he was on the Lance Armstrong Postal Service team. And I'm going to butcher some of the information on this because I don't know too much about cycling. I just learned a lot about it just talking to him for a few minutes. But Dylan, thank you so much for coming on, and I really appreciate your time.
Yeah. It's fun to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Dylan crushed the workout this morning. We did some deadlifts, some bench press, and here he's back here 12 hours later talking with us on the microphone. So, Dylan, your career began in 1990, all right? And you had a 13 career. This is all information I pulled from online. And your top accomplishments, 1999, you won the national championship for both time trial and individual pursuit. I kind of want to get into what those are. So can you give us just like what does it mean for time trial and individual pursuit?
So the individual time trial is essentially a race against the clock. So everybody goes over the same course. Lots of CrossFitters will be they'll understand the concept, but you race from point A to point B, and whoever has the fastest time wins.
Okay, is this outdoor?
It's outdoor. Okay. And then the individual pursuit is essentially a similar, but it covers 4 kilometers. And you actually start on opposite sides of the track from a competitor. So you can win. You can also win by catching your competitor.
Okay.
In under 4 kilometers. But again, it's also a timed event. And so, that was something that I won.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, he's one of 3 Americans ever to win both of those.
Yeah, I won both. It was the 2 events were about 3 weeks apart.
Wow. And that's not...
it's not common. I'm not sure if it's not common because it's not possible that somebody can do both. It might have been a combination of just like right place, right time.
Okay.
But whatever. I mean, my program set it up that year so that I could be competitive in both events. And it was kind of I had set out kind of with the objective of like, okay, here's 2 very, very important races that I want to target.
Okay.
And it just, the moons lined up.
That's awesome. And in 1999, also, you were a gold medalist in the Pan American Games.
Yeah, which is like a warm-up event for the Olympics.
Okay. In which, and Dylan, he qualified for the 2000 Olympics in Sydney.
That's right. Yeah.
And what happened there that prevented you from competing?
So I had this knee injury that was kind of nagging, and then leading up to the event, it just was not getting any better, and I crashed, of course, and it was just like one defeat after another. It was kind of like your classic Olympic nightmare.
Yeah.
And of course, the good stories are the ones that make it to the press, but mine wasn't a great story in that way. But I was still proud of making the team and being there and helping my teammates. But it was a heartbreak.
Yeah. So that's kind of like the end of close to the end of the career, but the end of what I have down right now. Can we start kind of rewind a little bit, and what got you into this sport initially?
Yeah. So we'll do a little fact correction. So that was actually kind of like the start of my professional career.
Oh, okay, the start of the career. Okay.
Yeah, we'll get back to.
Okay,
but my story is very different than that of my peers. If you compare it to like the story or kind of the way that people like Lance Armstrong or George Hincapie or Christian Van de Velde or some of my other teammates, or even some of especially the Europeans, the way that they got into the sport, they all started pretty much racing at a very, very young age and kind of grew up through the U.S. national team.
Okay.
And went and got to go race in Europe, et cetera. So mine was different. I kind of discovered cycling on accident when I was in college.
Wow.
And
so much later than these guys.
Yeah, much later. And it was kind of this thing. I was always kind of into cycling. I had a bike. I remember really the way I discovered is my parents took me to this barbecue in Los Gatos, California. So that's how I grew up in California.
Okay.
And there was this very famous race called Cat's Hill Criterium. And the race was like really close to downtown, and it was like a huge party. So that's why my parents would take me there. And I just saw this race, and it was so fast, and it was like it went up this super steep hill, and I was like, wow, this is amazing.
Yeah.
But yeah, just kind of like was in the right place at the right time in college, met some guys that are like, hey man, you want to go out for a bike ride? And I was like, okay, sure, why not? And then like really the thing that hooked me was this, like, I was like, oh wait, so when I ride my bike kind of consistently, I get faster.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, oh, I get faster. And then like when I go out and ride with other people, I'm faster than them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I was like, oh, okay, I like this.
Yeah, you kind of like fell into the competitive side of it.
Yeah. And I got hooked on that. I got hooked on that feedback loop.
Okay.
Immediately.
That's awesome. Now, did you have a competitive background prior to cycling? Like, were
Not
you
really.
an athlete growing up?
No, not really.
So
I was
this
like a
is
skateboarder.
Okay.
I was into skateboarding and
Always
like,
on wheels.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I was on the diving team in high school because there was this really attractive girl that I liked, and she was
That's
on the
usually
team,
how it
and I
works.
figured out like, hey, this is a good.
Very good reason.
But
that's
yeah,
interesting.
I tried to play football. I tried to play baseball. I just wasn't really that good at it.
That's a really interesting part to that. Like, I just envisioned someone at the reason I started off the podcast with your accomplishments, which were the start of your professional career, not the end, is I wanted to kind of get that message out there that you did reach the peak of the sport.
Right.
And the fact that you did not start from, I feel like every Olympian story I watch is, oh, they started training when they were 5 years old at the Olympic Training Center. I mean, listen to Matt Frazier as he pursued the Olympics and weightlifting as a teenager, and then he got hurt, right? That's a real, I don't think I've ever heard of that kind of story at the Olympic level where someone really picked it up that late in the game.
Right.
You must have a gift for aerobic capacity that is like, and you've probably been tested in terms of your VO2 max and all sorts of other measurements. Like, how do you feel your genetic ability or your innate ability stacks up against all these other athletes that you were against?
Well, it's like I said, when I first kind of fell into the sport, when I was in school and kind of training and racing with friends around that level, like I was just a lot better than everybody, and it was kind of easy. But when I got to Europe, and it's funny, I remember this first race that I did. It was my first year on U.S. Postal.
Okay.
And we went to do this race in Spain. I think it was called the Tour of Valencia or no, Semana Catalana. So it's this race in the Catalan region of Spain.
Okay.
And the first stage, we kind of went over some like what would be considered medium-sized mountains. We're not talking like major climbs.
Right. Okay.
And these guys that were known for being pure sprinters were climbing ahead of me up the climbs. And I was like, oh boy, I'm in trouble. You know what I mean? Like, I remember
that was your oh shit.
I was
moment.
like, oh shit, like this is a whole different level.
Yeah.
And I just, you know what? I don't think, and everybody will validate, coaches and friends and teammates will say, yeah, Dylan didn't have the biggest engine,
right?
But he'd figure out a way to win.
Okay.
You know,
I love
or
that.
he'd figure out a way to get it done. And so I think that was kind of how I made it in the sport.
Yeah. And we're definitely going to dive into that.
Yeah.
That's like what I'm most interested in hearing about.
Yeah.
The process of going from college kid that just got into cycling,
right,
found out that you're much better than other people. We call it natural gifts, or you just had a thing for it. What got you onto the Postal team? Was it a tryout? Was it an invite? What was that process like?
It's funny, and this has kind of been a theme that's run throughout my whole life, is that everybody thought I was crazy when I said I really wanted to be a bike racer. They're like, yeah, you're not that good. You're not good enough. And again, I didn't grow up doing the sport. And I don't know, there was just something about it where I was like, I don't care, I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
I just want this so bad.
Right.
I don't want to do anything else. And I remember having this very clear moment where I was like, if I don't do this and really pursue it, I'll spend the rest of my life regretting it. And so I graduated from school, from Santa Barbara, and my girlfriend at the time was going to go on to Stanford to get her graduate degree. So we moved to Palo Alto. And that part of California is a great place for cycling and a huge cycling community. So I was just like, I was in heaven.
Yeah.
And the way he did it, I was just like, oh, let's just go race, right? You find you get on a small team and you go to as many races as you can. And my whole philosophy was go to the hardest races I can find because that's how I was going to get better.
Now, these are all team races, right?
Yeah.
What makes you stand out amongst a team that says, all right, that guy is the one that we want on our team?
Well, you kind of have to work your way up through the ranks, right? Like part of being a team means that some days you sacrifice your own chances for the leader of the team or somebody on the team that's going to win.
Okay.
So there's this, you have a responsibility and accountability for being a team player.
Got it.
And it's very much a team sport. And then you also have to figure out when to make chances for yourself. You have to, like, sometimes you got to take
Take a little bit of a risk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I would get on these smaller teams, and then I'd get an opportunity to go for a result for myself, and I'd get one. And then also I would kind of target races that I knew that I could do well in, and try to get a result. And after that, you start getting results. And then again, remember I said, okay, it was 99. No, it was 98. 98 was the first year I won the national championships. And I knew that if I could win one of those national championships, I'd have a pretty good shot at getting a slot on the Postal team.
Got it.
Because once you win a national championship,
you're on the radar.
You're on the radar.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And so it's like I just kind of set some key goals and kind of work backwards from that. And every year I said, look, I gotta get a little bit better. I gotta do better than I did the year before.
Is there a specific season to your sport?
Yeah. It's typically February to October.
Okay. And now in your off season, are you training, or is that okay? What's the training like to become a better cyclist over time? Like, is it just on the road, on the bike at all times? Was it strength training? Was it aerobic, anaerobic? What was that kind of training like to kind of lead you to the next season, which you always had a more ambitious goal than the previous?
Yeah. So the off season was a good opportunity to kind of like fix some things that were broken, you know what I mean? Or like maybe deal with some injuries. Okay. That's also where cross training and mobility are really, really started to have a big role, because you could start to manage some of the imbalances, because those imbalances are basically where your weaknesses get exposed when you're at your worst.
Right.
Right. When you're on your limit.
Yep.
Those imbalances become your Achilles heel, so to speak. So the off season was really about trying to repair some of those, and you do kind of like a periodization program of strength training and maybe some longer, slower rides where you could start to work on your body composition, maybe lose a little bit of excess body weight, both muscle and fat.
Got it.
And then you would start to think about, okay, the first phase of the season, the second phase of the season, the third phase of the season, and you'd approach it from that perspective. It's also the time you'd have maybe some training camps.
Okay.
Maybe you'd get together with the team and start to plan for the next year.
Okay.
How is the U.S. sport compared to Europe or the rest of the world at the time in terms of competitiveness?
Well, like I said, going from as an amateur, kind of working your way up through the ranks in the U.S., the step function difference between racing in the U.S. and racing in Europe was like an order of magnitude harder. And it wasn't not only was it harder, but there was just, instead of there being like 10 guys that were really fast, every single guy who entered the race was fast.
Yeah.
So the depth was just so much deeper.
I'm trying to tie this to some of our CrossFit competitors that we coach and train with.
Yeah.
It's like these small races that he kept getting hooked up with. I would compare it to the local competitions that you basically just sign up for, show up and go. And now you're the magnitudinous race when you qualify for something, whether it's like what Dan just said at Masters Fitness Collective, and then the Tour de France is something like what I would call the CrossFit Games, right? It's like you're just constantly escalating yourself. And it's almost like that's one of the biggest surprises you see as an athlete is you're no longer one of 5 good athletes, you're one of 50. And just like the margin for error is so small when you get to that stage.
Totally. And the thing for me when I was working my way up through the ranks, I wanted to be in the hardest races I could find, because I knew that that's how I was going to get better.
Okay.
Because,
I love that.
Because the race pushes you to a level that you can't get to when you're training.
Mm-hmm.
And then also when you see somebody else going that fast, you're like, oh, okay, it's possible. I can do that.
Were you working at this time? Like, was this, how were you surviving?
No, I was living off prize money.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean,
sounds like Matt Frazier.
I mean, it was kind of like, all right, I remember this one vivid moment of like, I was doing this stage race in Altoona, Pennsylvania, and there was this really big race in Seattle the next weekend. And I figured out, well, how much money does a plane ticket cost from Philly or maybe Pittsburgh, I can't remember, to Seattle? And then I looked on the prize list for the next day to find out, it was $332, and fourth place pays $400.
So I'm
like, I got to get fourth or better to get to the next race. And so that's like super motivating.
I mean, that's a huge like part of sports success stories. It's when you really get put up against the wall like that and you actually go from I want to win to I need to win.
Yeah.
That's when you really find your true threshold.
Yeah.
And that's a really cool start to the career.
Yeah.
So now, as we were telling, let's just tell the audience real quick. you qualified for the Pan Am Games and the Olympics, and you said, when did the shift change where amateur athletes were the ones that qualified for the Olympics and those international races?
Yeah.
And then after that is when you became a professional, because you said the start of your pro career was started in 2000.
Yeah. So 96 is when they first allowed professionals to compete in the Olympics for cycling.
Got it.
And the significance of that is that it meant that the development pipeline that typically the United States Olympic Federation or Olympic Committee provided for athletes dried up.
Got it.
Right? Because prior to 96, most athletes, including Lance Armstrong, maintained their amateur status so that they could make the Olympic team, because that was everybody wanted to make the Olympic team, and it was a stepping stone to becoming a professional. When that changed, it kind of changed the dynamics of the development of the sport.
Right.
Which is why one of the reasons that I really focused on making the Olympic team on the track is because it was like a great way for me to make an Olympic team, because I was also racing professionally on the road for U.S. Postal. So it was like having two jobs at the same time.
Wow.
And I was fortunate because the U.S. Cycling Federation basically worked closely with the U.S. Postal Service team so that I could have the schedule
Got it.
to do both.
Oh, that's huge.
Right.
Okay.
So it's everybody tried to work together in that way.
So what happens after the Olympics in terms like your career lasted another few years, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So 99 was my first year on the Postal team, and that was the year that Lance won the Tour for the first time.
Got it.
And the Postal team was like, at the time, even though we were in what was called, I think, the World Tour, the Pro Tour, the name keeps changing, but ultimately like the major leagues for cycling, we were literally the Bad News Bears.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a ragtag group of guys, and
just personality wise.
Well, I mean,
or execution, like
just budget wise, and also like I think in '98, Lance, there was a couple guys on the team. There were like these older guys who were kind of at the tail end of their career, and were just like riding it out.
Yeah,
and we used to have this. Everybody had nice tour buses, and we had this like old rental camper van at the race start and finish line. But anyway, 99 was kind of our first year. Our first training camp was actually probably one of our best. Was at this place in Buellton, California.
Okay,
and we stayed at the Anderson Split Pea Soup Hotel. It was hilarious. And
go look that one up.
Yeah. And but it was actually one of the best training camps because it was just so pure and authentic and raw, and we were just there to get it done. Yeah. There was no fanfare. And that
was the first, right?
That was the first.
Yeah.
And so we went to Europe and got my head kicked in for the first 6 months. Mm-hmm. Came home and kind of like had a little bit of a break to regenerate. And went back to Europe, and then the first race was Tour Denmark, and I got 5th in the time trial. And it was kind of like, oh,
okay,
wait, maybe we got something here.
Yeah.
And then another race came along, and I got 2nd in one of the time trials. And
wow.
And then another race came, and I got 2nd in the time trial, and I managed to hang on for 3rd overall. And it was a pretty big race in Holland. And Johan Brunel, who's the director, calls me up. He says, "Hey, Casey, we're going to put you on the Vuelta squad." And the Tour of Spain, La Vuelta a España, was one of the other Grand Tours. So you had the Giro d'Italia, the Tour de France, and La Vuelta a España.
Got it. Okay.
And I was like, uh-oh. Because I wasn't really thinking about doing the Tour of Spain that year. But anyway,
How far away was it when you found out?
Oh, maybe a couple of weeks.
Oh, wow.
Maybe a week or two. No. It was just like, all right, show up, let's go.
Okay.
So it was a really good year. I think I kind of exceeded my own expectations. And then 2000 was a pretty good year. And then 2001, and I really had all this ambition of like making the tour team. And of course, that was like the penultimate achievement.
Right.
And I was doing this race in Dunkirk, and coming across the finish line, a cameraman wasn't looking and like turned left as we were coming across the finish line. I crashed into him, broke my pelvis and my collarbone and my scapula.
God. Oh no.
And it basically just ruined the whole year.
Yeah.
And it was like, shit.
Yeah. Oh man.
And I mean, but by the way, that's not a unique story. You know what I mean, like bike racers crash.
I feel like I've seen like YouTube video, fail videos of people just getting railed, or like people walking onto the course for no reason. Does it really?
Yeah, happens all the time. I mean, the fact that it doesn't happen more often is a miracle. But so long story short, like I really had a great career and exceeded every objective or kind of idea that I thought I was going to be able to achieve.
Yeah, that's awesome, man.
And it's funny because kind of looking back on it, I'm like, oh wow, I forgot I did that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then and then a couple of years later, I decided that I had this opportunity to kind of start a new career in the tech industry, and I was living in Palo Alto at the time, and I'm kind of like surrounded by it,
right?
And decided to make a graceful exit and went to work at Google.
Okay, that's awesome, man. That's a really cool, just awesome background story. Thanks for sharing all that. Sam, any thoughts before we go into
how many people are on the U.S. Postal team? And it seems like they're different, like you said, groups that you have to. So how competitive is it? Are you guys friendly with each other? Are you guys like duking it out with each other?
Yeah.
Like, how does that work for you guys?
Yeah. So typically, I mean, well, the first year I was on it, we only had 16 guys, which is crazy because that means you're running 2 programs of 8. Nobody can get sick or injured. But I think the average size now of a pro tour team is about 25 riders.
Okay.
And they'll typically run 2 or 3 programs at the same time. And you'll have 2 teams. You'll have the team that's kind of dedicated to the Grand Tours, and then you'll have a team that is focused on what's called the Classics, which were all the big races in Belgium, and then you might have another team of like young riders that are just kind of coming up through the ranks, and they'll kind of get splattered around. Competitive, totally. I mean, it's an interesting dynamic because you're like competing with each other for spots on the team,
right?
But then at the same time, you want the team to be successful. So sometimes you're like, yeah, okay, this other person is better than me right now, so they deserve the spot. So that dynamic exists. And then, of course, just like any work environment, there's going to be people you just don't like.
Right. Yeah.
In fact, it's funny. I was like referencing this person who will go unnamed, but I'm sure all my teammates that listen to this podcast will know exactly who I'm talking about. But I just did not like him, and he would just not really, he wouldn't do his job for me if I was leading the race or if I had a chance to win the race. But I was telling this story to somebody at work today. I'm like, you know what? There's people I just did not like when I was racing, but being a professional meant that even if I didn't like you, I was going to help you win if that was my job.
Right.
What was your role to help someone win? Like, what would you have to do to help someone win?
Well, cycling is a game of economics. Right. So like oftentimes if I was doing a race and Lance was there, part of my job was just to stay with him all day and keep him out of the wind so that he used the least amount of energy at all times.
So he'd backdraft you, you'd be right in front of him?
He would be drafting behind me. Actually, the way that it works is you would stay right behind him. Okay. And then when he said, okay, I want to go on the front, you'd have to take him in the front.
Okay.
You know what I mean? And the worst part is he had this horrible habit. He wanted to ride at the back and just relax. And then literally like at the worst possible moment, like at the very last minute, be like, okay, come on, Casey, let's go in the front.
Oh,
like, fuck, couldn't we have done this like 5 kilometers ago or something like that when it was easy? But so it's that way. And then also you'll see.
Is that predetermined?
What's that? Who's going to look after him? Yeah. You'll be on the team bus and be like, okay, so-and-so, you're doing this. So-and-so, you're doing that. Okay. So-and-so's looking after Lance or whatever.
Okay.
Yeah. It's all.
So you have to kind of be mentally ready for that at any point in the race.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And then oftentimes you'll see where the whole team will be on the front pulling. And generally, the protected rider won't participate in pulling, but they'll ride in the front right behind their team because it's really easy and safe.
Right.
But they may be trying to pull back a breakaway, or they may be trying to set up especially for sprinters, set up the sprinter to win at the very end of the race.
Got it. Now, if someone you said would not help you in a race, what would they not do? I mean, that would prevent you from helping you win that race.
Yeah, well, in this one race where I had a pretty good chance of winning, there was a breakaway up the road, and instead of going to the front and helping the team bring it back, this person was just hanging out doing their own thing.
Yes.
Just like
that's what like I just don't understand that at the sport. It's like isn't this predetermined that guy's got to go help you out, or he just makes a spontaneous decision to do that?
He's I'm not playing.
Man, that's crazy to me.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
When I talk to ex-pro athletes, some of them miss it, some of them don't miss it at all. How do you feel about it when you look back? Like, would you wish you were back in it if you had a chance, or are you like, don't miss that at all? That was a very taxing, stressful time of my life.
Well, I mean, I feel like nothing I do now compares to the level of stress and kind of like pressure that I experienced when I was an athlete. And I don't miss that part, but I do miss the simplicity of the life. I loved training.
Yeah.
I just loved that process. I mean, even that feeling that you get the night before when you're looking at the program, you're like, okay, what's tomorrow's program? What am I going to do? Okay, I'm going to get up. I'm going to have this for breakfast.
Yep.
I'm going to do this. I'm going to get just that planning process, and then like putting it together and showing up to the race and being like, okay, let's do this. I miss that. And I miss the emotions with my teammates and there's just some sort of magic that comes from what that whole experience was about that you can't reproduce. So I miss that, but I certainly don't want to go back. It's too hard.
It's really hard.
glad you got to experience it. Glad you got to experience it, but talk about it in the past tense. Yeah.
It seems like you're close with your teammates even years after. And and I know you're going to talk maybe like the organizations and what you founded with and what you're part of with your other teammates, including Lance Armstrong. So those ties still bind you even outside the sport.
Yeah.
Like what is that like to still be friends, to be close with your ex-teammates, and especially very famous, prominent teammates like Lance Armstrong? What's that like?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all experience something that nobody else can understand. And I think we have a special bond, both from the things that we accomplished as athletes, and I think especially in our story, the things that we accomplished or survived, outside of the actual competition. And so those are things that really matter. And I think obviously with age and wisdom, you start to realize the trophies on the wall don't really matter as much as the emotions and the experiences and the relationships that we have that came out of it. So I think we just grew to appreciate that much more than we did when we were athletes. I mean, the funny thing is Lance and I were probably not that close when we were teammates, but we're really close now. And I think that's just kind of the nature of things. But yeah, I mean, it's a special relationship. And it's funny because even I was speaking to my team at work, and obviously everybody in the world is going through some tough times right now the last couple of years. And we're struggling as an organization with lots of different things. And I just try to tell them, like, guys, look, there's a lot of stuff that's outside of our control, global macroeconomic economy, et cetera, like pandemics, this and that. But the one thing we can control is like how we get together and how we work together as a team. We can control that. And it's probably the thing that matters the most. So let's do it.
Yeah. I want to talk about that, just like in terms of coping with the adversity that you were going through with the whole, I mean, I don't want to call it the doping scandal, what you would call it back then, but the adversity that you met in that situation with Lance Armstrong, doping and getting caught, and then you guys guilty by association. You can go into that if you want.
Sure.
What kind of adversity, what was the initial feeling there in terms of, all right, what is this going to do to my career? What is this going to do to my reputation in my future?
Yeah. So when everything was going down, this was like 2011, 12.
Yeah.
I had been out of the sport for a while. And so I didn't really have too much liability. You know what I mean? Like, sure, I had to testify in front of the federal grand jury. I had reporters calling me, and I mean,
probably harassing you.
Oh yeah, they were doing all kinds of stuff, and I just didn't really care. I was just like, you know what? I've got 2 Fs to give, and or I've got no Fs to give, right? Like, whatever.
Yeah.
So I was more concerned about my friends. I didn't really think I had too much exposure, so I was very fortunate. That way. I still had to my personal friends and family, had to be like, well, here's
something to answer to.
Here's the deal, right? And I was okay with that. I kind of came to terms with it, and it was just kind of an experience that I had to go through personally. And what was unique and interesting about my experience is that because I was a little bit further removed than the guys who were more still in the sport, still racing, still dependent on it for a livelihood.
Right.
I was almost kind of like this credible mediator. You know what I mean?
That makes sense. Yeah.
Like I could kind of talk to them about it in a way because I had a level of credibility and trust, and I understood what was going on, but at the same time I was a little bit removed so I could be
perfect.
You know what I mean?
Yep. I know exactly what you mean.
So I tried to help the guys talk through it that way and try to help them see what was going on. And I think one of the biggest realizations and the things I tried to push with them was like, guys, look, we can't expect everybody else on the outside to see things the way that we see them.
Right.
We just can't.
Yep.
It's they're going to be angry, hurt, upset, or they're going to think that we're liars and cheaters, and it's not really going to do us much to try to change their minds.
Yep. I mean, especially now, we see that with like this world issues now. I mean, this is 10 plus years after that situation. You're not going to change people's minds.
Right.
And you're just going to drive yourself nuts if you keep on trying to do that, you know, especially about a situation like that.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Many of them personally, for you, these are good. Were these good people? Are these people that you supported, or how did you feel when you saw your former teammates, your friends going through this? What was the overwhelming emotion for you during this time?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting question, just because I went through so many different emotions the whole time. I think that I wasn't judgmental of anybody. I think what was hard what made some situations hard was where you knew what people were doing, but they were saying something completely different publicly. And I remember a part of me was just like, oh, you know, that asshole, what's he?
Right.
And then I just realized, I'm like, you know what? It's not my deal.
Right.
Like I don't need to judge that person.
Cool. Smart.
I think when it was related to me personally, I had some strong emotions about it. A lot of people said some stuff about me that was true or not true, but I just had to let that go.
Yep.
It wasn't my fight anymore.
Right. That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Now, this kind of adversity, can you tie that kind of adversity? We don't have to keep it Debbie Downer right now.
Yeah.
Like even some of the positive experiences, like I would love to hear some of the things that you learned as an athlete. Like we've talked, I think last week it was a really good short conversation. I was telling my wife about it, about how you felt like your mental game is what helps you rise above other more talented, you want to call them more capable athletes. How has that kind of led the way to where you are now in terms of world, socially, family life, like that kind of adversity, taking it head on and taking the positive out of it?
Well, you guys asked like how did I rate kind of like on a physiological level, and while I knew I kind of had an engine that I made it to that level, I wasn't as talented physically as some of my teammates and competitors were, and you can only do so much to train your weaknesses. But I knew that the one thing I had control over was kind of like my mental approach to everything, and I felt like that's where I could have the greatest amount of impact or control. And also the sport was just, it's not always the strongest person wins.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like there's a lot of calculation that goes into it. And there's, again, cycling is a sport of economy. You got to get the end with the most amount of energy, right? And CrossFit's not a lot different, to be honest.
Not at all. Yep.
Right? Like you're always doing a workout. Like I love it when there's like, do 10 rounds of this. And I'm like, okay, cool. So, and then I study each movement and I'm like, okay, which one's really going to hurt? Which one can I recover in?
Right.
How do I soft pedal this one so that I can go really hard on that one?
Love that, man.
Can
you coach for us?
and so that like mentality,
love it. Yeah.
I just loved that stuff. So like, for example,
can nerd out on that stuff all day.
When we started figuring out like, oh, hey, like for example, our team got a bunch of criticism back in, which is crazy now looking back on it, but we would go preview the courses.
Right.
Of course, everybody does that now. But like when you know where the top is, you can go 10, 15% harder.
Right.
Because it's like, okay, I'm going to be cross-eyed when I get to the top, but I'm going to go over the other side. I'm going to recover. No big deal. Yeah. Right. So that kind of like analysis and then how you apply your mind to it was just like, I was That's so awesome. Intoxicated by that.
Yeah. Work smarter, not harder.
Yeah. And then to answer your question, how does that translate to today? I mean, like all the time I'm thinking about, okay, this is going to be really hard.
Yeah.
Like, okay, let's take a deep breath. Let's, I always, what's the saying? Like, decide what you're going to do before.
Yeah, you're a planner.
Yeah.
Map things out.
Yeah, because like, for example, in a race, if you decide on the bus before the race starts where you're going to attack, or when your competitor attacks, no matter what, you're going to go with them. When you make that decision ahead of time, when it happens, you're more likely to be able to do it than waiting for the moment to dictate it, right? Yeah, I don't know. There's just something that I love about that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I even compare it to some people that try to like, if they're struggling with the nutrition, they always say like, don't go food shopping when you're hungry. It's you have to have that plan set up prior to, and go there with your plan, because when you're making spontaneous decisions, in a not the greatest state of mind.
Right.
That like you said, that cross-eyed feeling.
Right.
I see it at the gym all the time.
Right.
Whether it's a random Tuesday WADA or someone's competing at a big competition, the ones that lack that ability to strategize, forecast, and respond to any little bit of adversity, they don't get the most out of themselves. I say the same thing about a lot of CrossFit competitions. It's not always the people that are the fittest or the most talented that will win.
Right.
And they have to have a certain level of capability, capacity as well. But it's the one, I do think it's a more mental game. Like, I think there's a lot of similarities. So I keep nodding my head to what you're saying.
Yeah. Also think about like when you're training and you have a program and you have a big event coming up and you have a bad day. How do you handle that bad day?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Or what happens when,
what's your response? Yeah.
What happens when you're like, okay, I have today's schedule calls for the following workouts or the following movements or whatever it is. And you get 10 minutes in and you feel like crap. What are you going to do? You know what I mean?
Yep.
And I mean, I can't tell you how many times where I've gone out to do a ride and I'm like, okay, I'm going to go out and do this long. And the first half hour, I'm like, man, I feel like crap. So if you let yourself turn around right then, you're like, no way. Like, no, I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait like another hour. The joke is don't quit today. You know what I mean? Especially in cycling, because of stage races. So you got to finish every day to make it to the next day. So like there's a point, I guarantee you every pro cyclist has this gone through their head where they're in the middle of the stage and they are so miserable and suffering so bad that they're looking for any excuse to quit.
Yeah.
And if you just say, okay, you know what, I'm going to wait until I'm going to go 5 more miles before I make a decision.
Yeah.
And then 5 more miles and then 5 more miles. So like those little mental games that you can play with yourself, like have a huge difference.
Yeah.
That's so CrossFit.
It's so CrossFit. Yeah.
Very much so.
I know. It sounds like you're listening to a transcript of someone mentally of any single workout that we do here.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You play those mind games with you. Yeah.
Are you still cycling after your pro career, or have you just given it up completely at this point?
No, I try to ride every day.
Oh, you do?
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you have ever since you stopped?
No. When I first stopped and started my job at Google, I was like, okay, this is my new job. I'm going to go all in. I'm going to work all day. And it was funny because I realized all of a sudden, I'm like, oh, wow. I just gave up. Like I just stopped doing 6 hours a day of mental processing.
Yeah. You
Right.
probably do some of your best thinking on
Oh,
the bike.
the best,
Yeah.
right? Like I used to carry one of those little, like this is before iPhones, but I used to carry a mobile recorder so that I could record things that I was thinking about so I wouldn't forget by the time I got home. But yeah, so it's like my church when I'm riding my bike. And it's such a healthy thing for me to deal with stress and just where I kind of work out all my problems.
Do you ride with people or just by yourself?
When I lived in California, I just moved here a couple of years ago. I used to ride with all kinds of friends and groups, and I moved here in the middle of COVID. So it was like, okay, I guess I'm riding by myself. And so I just haven't really connected with a bunch of other people yet, but I'm looking to ride with other people. So
Well, yeah, I mean, I know we have a few people here that do bike.
They do, yeah.
And hook them up with Reno. Yeah, Reno just got done with an Ironman.
I don't know. He's so competitive. I don't know. He might try to kill himself trying to keep up.
Do you have any lingering injuries, or I don't want to call them side effects, from such a rigorous career?
I mean, I've got a little problem with my left hip, which is where I broke my pelvis.
Okay, from that injury, you think?
I don't know. It's funny because
it might have been the start of it.
It didn't really start bothering me until much later.
Okay.
But honestly, CrossFit helps a lot. Yoga is actually amazing.
Okay.
When I do yoga regularly, it like totally balances me out for some reason.
Okay, interesting.
But yeah, you always have these little nagging injuries. Or
what is a common, like one thing, tell me if I'm wrong, one thing that I've seen with a lot of people that have a strong biking background is because you guys spend so much time in that position, actually struggling to be able to extend the backside, the posterior, the hamstrings. Like, I know you were probably at a different level of like preparation and training and stretching, but are there any things that with your past teammates, any common ground that you've seen people that cycle a lot that they're dealing with that you would like to maybe help them get ahead of?
I think honestly, all the core mobility stuff is probably the most important thing to pay attention to.
Okay.
Because stating the obvious, like a strong core, your everything is dependent on a strong core.
Absolutely.
And it's also the thing that like when it breaks down, everything else fails.
Yeah. That's that's usually step one.
Yeah. No matter how strong your legs are, if your core goes out, then there's nothing to put the power down.
Yep.
I would say the other one is that a lot of the hip flexors, because you're in this weird position all the time, that one gets messed up. The Soyaz is a big one.
Yep.
And I think it's kind of like the more that you put into that earlier on, the bigger payoff you get later on.
Right.
It's
Yeah,
just
that's
like
a lot of
anything.
the training, like the accessory Sam, that we talk about with athletes that love to work out. They're here all the time and they're like constantly getting beat up. It's all those little accessory movements and the little accessory muscles. You almost wish you used to do them more because of how you feel now. And if you want to avoid that long-term pain or long-term discomfort, this is the time to do it. Just get ahead of it like that. Yeah.
The other thing I think that is underrated are rest days.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. As we get older, for
yes,
sure.
absolutely.
And
you're pretty regimented now here, right? Is it 2 or 3 days a week?
So I usually try to come at least 3, maybe 4 days a week. A lot of it just depends on my travel schedule because I spend a lot of time down in Miami, and I do CrossFit down there too. Those guys they're maniacs also.
Yeah. We all are.
And I'm just like the last 2 to 3 months, I'm kind of like hitting it more regularly.
Yeah, I've noticed.
And I've been doing CrossFit and riding. Like today I did CrossFit this morning, and then this afternoon I rode.
That's awesome.
And in fact, I think I recover faster when I do that, especially
I believe that.
since today we did squats and everything.
Yeah.
And so I'm just in a good groove right now, and just having fun with it.
What's your CrossFit start story? How did you even get into it in the first place?
Yeah, it was one of my buddies was always like, would not stop fucking talking about it.
Really? A CrossFitter not talking? Really? Wow, not stopping.
I mean, and Billy, he's a talker, first off. And we would be out on these rides and he would just not stop talking about, oh my God, you're killing me.
Where were you at the time?
In Palo Alto.
Okay.
And, but I had always been like, yeah, I remember when I was working at Google, they had like some training programs that you could do. And I did some of them. And I remember how much better I felt on the bike. Because I was kind of working through my core, and cyclists don't have the best kind of physiques in general. So I was like, yeah, maybe a little upper body would help.
Yeah.
So then, just one day I walked into CrossFit Palo Alto and started working out with those guys, and they were really cool. And yeah, I just loved it.
How long ago was that?
I think maybe like 2015, 2016.
Okay. That's kind of like right around the surge before.
That's a long time. You've been CrossFitting for a
6,
while.
7 years, yeah.
Yeah, I should be better.
we all should.
We say the
all
same thing
should be
about
better.
Hopefully the programming gets better. That'll help. Are you one of those athletes now? We have athletes, former college athletes, a couple of former pro athletes that have always said, oh, I wish I knew about this stuff when I was competing.
Yeah.
The training in which you guys took on while you were professional or amateur, aspiring to be a professional, and what you know about training now, what's known about training in general, both in and out of the CrossFit space. Do you ever find yourself thinking, man, if I had known about this when I was in college, I would have been at a higher level?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, no question.
Okay. That's
I
interesting.
mean, not just one of the things that I really appreciate about about CrossFit is that there is like these elements of yoga in it.
Right.
I mean, even if we do crow's pose and
pigeon,
pigeon, and the way that we stretch and even some of the movements, I think are really beneficial for all athletes, regardless of the sport.
Yep.
And then I think also just this overall approach to more balance, right? Like, the CrossFit in general is this idea of like not going too far in one direction.
Correct.
And I think that that's something that really benefits a lot of athletes. So yeah, working a lot of the movements. In fact, I know a bunch of guys that are still racing. I know a woman who's a pro mountain biker in Palo Alto. She lives in Palo Alto and she works out with a trainer. And a lot of the movements that they do are like Olympic lifts and kind of like really focused mobility work, like one-legged squats on the balance bar or balance thing. You know what I mean? Things like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that a lot of the pro athletes today are incorporating a lot of the movements that are done in CrossFit.
Interesting.
And then I think also just the whole this concept of, okay, part of your workout today is going to be a strength movement, and then part of it today is going to be this timed component.
Tomorrow's workout for you, yeah.
You know what I mean?
We have a couple of those days this week, yeah.
And so I think that's really effective. It's kind of funny because it's like the class is an hour, and then you count like the actual number of minutes you were working out was like
Very
not
small.
that much.
Yeah. Sometimes you find that out when you video your workout. You're like, oh my, I really was not working out that much at all.
But I also think it's important to recognize that like the warm up is part of the workout, right? The warm down is part of the the workout, and so it's. I think you just got to really take each one of them seriously. Like I remember one point in my CrossFit journey reading or watching a video about, like, even when you go to do the warm up, like, do it with intention.
Yes.
Be
absolutely.
clear about what exactly you're
Very much
trying
so.
to do for the warm up.
That's
So
great. Yeah.
that kind of approach, I think, just pays off.
Love
huge.
that.
Are you still in the tech industry? What do you do now?
Yeah.
And then also talk a little bit about WEDÖ, which you mentioned that you're working
Yeah.
with Lance Armstrong.
Yeah. So worked. I moved out here for a job, actually, and although my wife grew up here in Bergen County, so she's native, and moved out here for a job, and then ended up getting recruited down to this company called REEF Technology in Miami, and we basically do ghost kitchens, and so I run the product and engineering team that builds out all of the infrastructure to manage how all of the orders flow from like DoorDash or Uber Eats to the actual kitchen, and then how does it get picked up and delivered to the person. So it's a really interesting company.
I think I ordered from Mr. Beast, which is one of those types of companies.
Yeah, Mr. Beast is one of our partners.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
Because they how are they able to
exactly,
like,
it's magic.
Right, because they don't have an actual place.
No, it's just like we call them vessels, and we put them in parking lots. We own a bunch of parking lots.
It's amazing. Okay, all right, cool.
But yeah, WEDÖ is this it's this community, and Lance gets all the credit for it, but he kind of showed, and by the way, this was kind of like when he was like, well, shit, what am I going to do now? Yeah, right. And he started a podcast called The Forward, and it was really about him talking to other people that have done interesting things in their lives. And ultimately it always comes down to some sort of idea of perseverance. And what was your story? And he interestingly and surprisingly turned out to be a really good podcaster. He's a great interviewer, takes it really seriously, just like he did the bike. So he will sit there and read everything and study and prepare for hours. And it was a really good show. And then he also had this idea of kind of creating this community for people that are all crazy like us and love to suffer.
Yeah.
And so he kind of coined this term, WEDÖ, which is the answer of like, well, who wants to go run 100 miles today? And who's crazy enough to do that? And one of our sayings is it's this idea where you find your greatest peace in your greatest moment of suffering. You know what I mean? So
I love that. That's cool.
So we started this company called WEDÖ, and it started off with a show around, actually, no, Lance, George Hincapie, Christian Vandevelde, and I got together to do this 24-hour mountain bike race in Moab called the 24 Hours on the Old Pueblo. And it was a suffer fest. And we did like a video about it. And it was fun. It was just kind of our first foray into kind of telling these stories.
Yeah.
And then we started a commentary show around the Tour de France called The Move.
Okay.
And then we started covering a bunch of the other races, and then we've put on a couple of events. And it's just kind of grown organically. And
did I miss that? When did you start? When was this?
I think it started in 2017, 2018, somewhere
so
around
about 5 years in, 4 or 5 years in. Okay.
Yeah, and so it's a show. We have a couple of podcasts. We do kind of a journal and a newsletter, and we're just putting content out there. And it's really just it's not so much about the races, other than obviously we do a bunch of coverage of all the Pro Tour races, but it's also just a kind of the story of people that love to suffer.
Okay.
And yeah, it's a fun project.
I think there are more people out there that find value in shared adversity.
Yeah.
We find it in CrossFit, but like you said, there are so many other instances that bring people closer together. Pro athletes on a pro team, people working together on big projects, whatever it is, like whatever brings you closer in terms of working together for a goal or for something maybe bigger than yourself, where you're really pushing yourself. There's something special about that.
Yeah. Well, and I think also this, after everything that we experienced, like the process of preparing for events or some sort of objective and a goal, and then going out and doing it with people that you care about, and then being able to tell the story and the things that happened, is really kind of like what living life to its fullest is all about. We feel like that's where, if you can do that kind of stuff, you're rich.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
And so our vision for this community of people and this brand and this platform that we're creating is just helping people do that.
Yeah.
That's really what it's all about.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the pandemic showed more than anything how much the connection to people how important it is for people to just like get through like the day-to-day rigors. I hear that more about this gym than anything physical. Like people want to get the muscle ups and hit the lifts, but it's that pandemic showed us like how big of a responsibility it is to try and get people to connect with each other and just for the sake of helping them. At first you started gym like this and you're like, oh, it's about fitness and health. And yes, it is, but it's actually has become more of a mental thing than the physical. And then it leads to the physical gains as well.
Oh, totally. And think about the people that you have coming here. They all do different things. They have different backgrounds. They have different goals. They're different phases of their lives. Yet we all come together for an hour and we're all focused on doing the same thing. You know what I mean? And it's like we're looking at the clock, we're looking at each other. We're always, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I've seen you kind of go after people on the run a few times. And again, it's in your blood, and it's all in good nature too, and that's what I love about it the most. It's just all like the energy that you see in a place at 5 a.m. It's just, where else do you get that? And it's just a really unique thing. I think it's really cool, and it's probably the same exact thing with what you guys are doing at WEDÜ.
Yeah, no, totally.
It's really
the same
cool
thing. In fact, we want to branch out into other sports and other disciplines.
Is
it
really, mainly cyclists?
Well, right now it's mainly cyclists, but we want to make it so that CrossFitters have a place to go and tell their story. Right.
I'll tell you what, man, I think there's a market for it in that. Yeah. Just because that's, people love talking about CrossFit, like you said.
Totally.
How did you hear about it?
Yeah, I mean, and it's the same for cycling too. People love getting together after the ride to go to the coffee shop and talk trash.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Hell yeah.
And so
it's like a bar, like I always say, the endorphins people have after a workout, a training session. Oh, it's no different than being at a bar. It's just people just like put their guard down, and that's where true bonds are really made.
Yeah, no, and I love the community part that you touched on, because like I think that's such a powerful thing, and it's funny, people, when I try to explain the mechanics behind what CrossFit got right as a thing, right? It's this idea that you're like, okay, I have a goal. He's showing me how to do the thing to achieve the goal. There's a number on the wall that is going to tell me how I did on the goal. And there's a bunch of people that are going to rally around me to help me achieve the goal. It's like the fucking, like, all boxes checked. You know what I mean? No wonder it's so successful, right? And so I think like it's funny because there's a lot of other areas where you could apply the same mentality and be successful, right? And
very much so.
And just understanding those human elements. I mean, I love seeing it when somebody's really struggling and everybody kind of rallies around to help them through that. Like that's what it's all about.
Special moments.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dylan. That was as good as I thought it was going to be, if not better. And it's funny that I've trained you in classes dozens of times, but this is the first time I really feel like I got to know you. And because I didn't want to be too nosy or too intrusive at the gym. And I know you show up to work out, but I really appreciate the time that you gave us tonight. And I know everyone that listened to it got a lot out of it. And we're definitely looking forward to seeing what WEDÜ does. And hopefully CrossFit will get associated with them at some point.
Yeah, well, I want to say thanks to both of you for having me. I feel like I have a lot of gratitude in having the opportunity to kind of share the stories. And it's interesting because oftentimes, I forget about the past and kind of like the labels that got applied to it of Olympics and Postal team and this and that. And I'm just another guy in there trying to get some push-ups and pull-ups in. But then having the opportunity to kind of like help other people or inspire other people is like such a huge honor. So I really appreciate the opportunity to sit down and jam with you guys. So thank you.
All right. Thanks, man. All right. We'll see you guys next week. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for taking the time out of your day to listen to the Herd Fit podcast. Be on the lookout for next week's episode.